Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for July 15th, 2017, the 8th year of Cheongi, the second fifth month and the 22nd day of that second fifth month. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. And I'd like to start this morning with the weather, as we usually do. Let's see, in the Cheongguk area, it's in the low 60s right now and some cloudy or dense fog. And it's going to get up to about 81 degrees today, somewhat warmer than yesterday when the temperature stayed in the 70s. We'll have periods of sun, but looks like it's going to be mostly cloudy today. And tomorrow will be a little bit warmer, in the about 85 degrees, and mostly sunny for a very nice Sunday. And then looks like we're going to be in the mid or low 80s for the next several days. And fortunate thing is that the humidity is going to drop. We've had some very high humidity the last several days, but that's going to drop. It's still going to be not exactly dry, but it will be not quite as humid as we've been having. All right, let's go to the Rima for today. I'm in the Old Testament this morning. And let's see, where did I have this? Yes, here. We're in 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel, chapter 28, and in verse 17, and a little bit following that. And so this is Saul and Samuel having a conversation. Saul is realizing that God has left him. And although, it was Samuel who anointed Saul to become king approximately 40 years before this, Saul has been engaging in quite a bit of immorality, and God is taking the kingdom away from him and is going to give it to David pretty soon. And so Saul goes to Samuel and is asking for help. And Samuel basically is saying, why are you coming to me? You should have done what you should have done, and things will be all right. So anyway, he's here. Samuel is talking here, and the Lord hath done to him as he spoke by me. For the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to David, because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. So Samuel is saying to Saul that, God said to you to destroy Amalek and the Amalekites, but you didn't do that. You didn't do what God told you to do, and so he's taking the kingdom away from you. He's going to give it to David. We've been having the OSTP, the original substance of the divine principle, absolute sex education, for the last week. We started, actually, today is Saturday. We started last Saturday. So today's the 8th day. And a number of things are really stuck in my mind. Of course, I'm trying to remember how many times I've been through the OSTP, and this is the fourth time that I can remember. I was in Bangkok, and I was in San Marino, and I was at least once in Stingny, and there may have been another one in Stingny. I'm not sure. So this is either the fourth or fifth time I think that I've been going through this education. And Reverend Yu, our educator, he says he says I'm not a lecturer, I'm an educator. So I'll not call him a lecturer. He has been telling us that Father said that everyone needs to go through this at least 5 times. I think probably the emphasis there will be on the at least. Very minimum, I think, will be the 5 times. And there are a number of things that have really stuck out for me this time. I think each time, of course, you have new realizations and new understandings, but a number of things have stuck out for me, and that is that God is a God of principle, of law, and of order. and in order for us to have God working in our lives, have Him working with us and helping us, we need to align ourselves with His principle and His laws and His order. And when we do that, then God can be with us, even in the small things in our lives, even in the daily things in our lives. Even, for example, in choosing this Rhema this morning, I believe that God helped me and was with me in choosing the Rhema. Because here, God is here in this Rhema. I believe that God is saying that Saul was given the kingdom, but he didn't fulfill his responsibility. He was given this position as a king, which I'm sure was very comfortable and very nice. And but then. And then he gave Saul a chance to do what he was supposed to. He told Saul what he needed to do, but he didn't do it. And in fact, he used his position to engage in immorality. He did not keep the standard of absolute sex, which is probably one of the most important of God's principles and laws. And so as a result, God has decided to take it away from him and give it to David, to give David a shot. Of course, we know that David also had his difficulties later on, but God kept trying to give different people. First Saul, then David, and then finally Solomon. David, of course, did some pretty terrible things in terms of from the viewpoint of absolute sex, but that's not part of today's Rhema. But we really sometimes these things that we learn seem trivial, but we can apply them in our daily lives, and when we do, we align ourselves with God, and He is able to be with us and work with us and guide us, and that is incredibly important, especially in this age of confusion, when we are seeking guidance, when we don't know sometimes where to turn. We're in a time that we never imagined would actually come, where almost 5 years ago now, True Father passed into the spirit world, and but before doing so, left us his word. And so, in passing to the spirit world, he appointed his inheritor and representative body in the person of Hyungjinim, and he also appointed Kukjinim to assist his brother. And so he left these two brothers in charge, but then and he left many volumes of his words. So far, 615 volumes of Father's selected works have been selected speeches have been published, and according to Reverend Yu, if the Family Federation were to continue publishing Father's words, then they could easily get to volume 1000. But he says the Family Federation has chosen to suspend the publication of Father's words. And instead of publishing Father's words, they've gone about publishing their own new canonical texts, which of course are abominations, and change Father's words and delete Father's words. Who would have imagined, let's say 5 years ago today, in July of 2012, who would have imagined that 5 years later we would be in this position? In this time in the middle of July in 2012, we were still thinking that our Father would be with us for many years to come. Although he was old, he was still traveling back and forth between Korea and the United States, going to Las Vegas and speaking to members here in the United States, and then going to Korea and speaking to members there, and going to other places. It was in 2011 that he toured Europe, and also went to Nigeria around that time as well. But we are here, and we are here, and we are seeking God's guidance. Today, the Han Mother will be speaking, is scheduled to speak at the Madison Square Garden, and there we expect that she will tell the crowd that she is the only begotten daughter, and and I don't know what else she will say, but she has been telling people in Korea and in Thailand and in Japan that she is the only begotten daughter, and that she is the Messiah, and that she is born sinless, and that Father was born with original sin, and that he only became the Messiah when he met Jesus at the Korean age of 16, or in Western age 15 in 1935, and other things that simply do not make sense and actually contradict what we have been taught and what Father has been teaching through his words. There's no way that a person can be born with original sin and then suddenly one day at age 15 become the Messiah, or Messiah has to be born without original sin, because he brings God's seed to the earth. That is the mission of the Messiah, and yet she proclaims that she herself is the Messiah. And it's very tragic what has happened to her, and that she is now going around the world to different countries, committing sin by declaring these falsehoods and making these unprincipled statements. And perhaps there's a parallel between her and Saul, where God is going to have to take her kingdom away from her, and but of course it was in her case it was a kingdom that she usurped in the first place. It was never hers to have. Let's go to our Rima in the Cheonseongyang. Through the fall, Satan took away all humankind. He carried them all off to hell. For among those who were taken away, God separates people out one by one. This world used to be a wild olive tree in the satanic world, but God has turned it into a heavenly olive tree. God made Christianity in the democratic world be a wild olive tree on the heavenly side, so it could lead the world. When the satanic world weakens and the Christian culture realm is established, the Lord will come at his second advent, cut off all at once, and graft them completely, making them one, and turn them around. Today the left wing has perished, and the right wing has almost collapsed. Who brought this about? God and true parents did. Families who have become one with true parents inherited true parents' path, so they should be strong and courageous wherever they are in the world. Then, just as God and the universe protect me, it will protect them, and winning the heart of a nation will be no problem. One of the things that we've learned in the current OSDP absolute sex education is that we have been misunderstanding the concept of champumo until now. Cham, of course, is the Korean word where we translate the cham into true, and pu is father and mo is mother. So true, father, mother would be the literal translation of those Chinese characters, and and so we have always translated this as true parents, but in the plural, because you have father, mother, two, so you stick an S on the end. It's plural. But one thing that has come up in this education is that champumo is is the name that God gave to Reverend Sun Myung Moon. That Champumo is the name that God gave, and it is the official name, that God gave to Reverend Sun Myung Moon. So Champumo refers to one person, not two. Champumo refers to one person, not two. And this is in Father's words, and I can get the citation to anyone who is interested. But it's in Father's words, and it is from Father's words in 1996, as I recall. It was in volume 200 something, but I don't have the exact number in front of me. So we need to change the English translation. It is not true parents, but it is true parent. And so also here this is of course, what I just read was the English translation of the Korean original, the Cheonseonggyeong. And so here, if I were to reread this, taking the S off, let's see how it will go. And I think you'll see that there's quite a different meaning when you take the S off of Champumo. Let's see, where is that first here? Who brought this about? God and the true parent did. God and the true parent did. So the left wing has perished and the right wing has almost collapsed. Who brought this about? God and the true parent did. Families who have become one with the true parent inherited true parent's path. So there it's apostrophe S instead of S apostrophe as we have here. I'm on page 237. Inherited true parent's path, so they would be strong and courageous wherever they are in the world. Then, just as God and this universe protected me, this is correct. So here he is referring to himself, not himself and mother, but himself only. So just as God and the universe protected me, the true parent, in other words, he's referring to himself, it will protect them, and winning the heart of a nation will be no problem. So who brought this about? God and the true parent did. See, he's leaving. Mother was not a part of this. Mother was not a part of this. God and the true parent did. God and the true parent did. Wow, yeah, that changes the meaning quite a bit. And all these years, even though Father said in 1996, 21 years ago, that Champumo was the official name that God gave to Reverend Sun Myung Moon, we continue to translate Champumo with the S on the end in the plural. If we had not done that, if we had translated in the singular, I think many more people would not be as confused as they are today. That Champumo refers to Father. So what is mother then? Of course, the true parent came. The true parent came and chose a woman in the fallen world to stand in the position of his object partner. And then through the two of them, all were reborn. And then he guided her and led her and educated her to become the true mother, so that she could become the true mother. But she had to follow him and do as he said in order to become the true mother. But she was in that position, and of course, people say, well, how could have these blessings? But remember that in 1978, Father performed a blessing in London, and the Han Mother was not available to stand with Father to perform this blessing. And so what did he do? He chose one of his daughters to stand next to him, to stand with him in that blessing and to perform that blessing with him. He chose one of his daughters when his wife was not available. So the fact that Han Mother has been performing these blessings along with Father ever since 1960 does not mean that she was perfect at that time, or that she was sinless at that, or that she was perfect at that time. But of course, when she performed the blessing, she was sinless, because she had at that point her original sin had been removed by Father in 1960. Through the holy marriage blessing, Father's holy marriage blessing in 1960, and so she was sinless at that point, but she was not born that way. She was not born that way. And of course, her lineage was prepared for that, and I'm sure that there could have been other. I'm sure there were other lineages that were prepared that way, because she was not the first to be put in that position. And Father has said that if Che Seonggil, his first wife, had accomplished her portion of responsibility, then he never would have met the Han Mother, and the current true children would not be here. There's also a very clear quotation from Father on that. And so she was not not even his first choice. But she was the person, though, that happened to receive this anointing, and she happened to be, and by that she was placed in a huge and an incredible position to become the true mother of all humanity. So it is really tragic to see now where, in she's now failing to fulfill her responsibility to unite with Father, and is destroying the blessing that Father gave her, and is now in a downward spiral, where she is going around the world making proclamations that are horrendous from God's point of view. And just as God removed Saul, he's going to remove her, unless she can. Well, we will see what happens when she repents. If and when she repents, we will see. But it would be very, very hard to imagine how she can be returned to her original position. Once a central figure fails, God cannot use that central figure again, and so it would stand to reason that this would apply to her also. And so that certainly she cannot now go back to the 2013 and redo the Foundation Day in the proper way, because she already then united with Satan at that point. And so now the mission that she should have completed, the responsibility she should have completed, now has to be completed by Yeonanim, who is the queen of Cheongguk, along with with Hyungjin being the king. Where when the third king arises, then Yeonanim will submit to her son, the third king, and thereby submit to Father's lineage, which the Han Mother did not do, and thereby complete the responsibility that needed to be done. Reverend Yu makes the point that when God has a victory, he's able to draw a line. So victory, draw a line, so that no matter what mistake is made after that, it only falls to that point. There's the TV game show, You Want to Be a Millionaire, and you answer questions, and every time you get a right answer, it goes up, right? And then there are certain places in that ladder where even if you get one wrong, you don't go all the way down to the bottom to zero. You only go down to a certain point, whether it's $10,000 or $100,000 or whatever. And it's kind of like that, where God is able to draw a line and say, okay, this part has been done. This is banked. This is in there. And even if someone makes a mistake after that, we're only going to go down to that point, and Satan cannot take away this victory, because this is in the books. And so what Mother did, what the Han Mother did during Father's lifetime, is in the books like that. It's in the books. And after that, she failed. When Father was not there, and she at the Songhwa and at the Foundation Day, well, she did that, and all the changes, all that was a failure, and all that is going to go down to that point. But then what she did during Father's lifetime is not a failure. That victory is there. It has been booked, and it is there for eternity. So just that part that she did not do after Father's passing needs to be done, and that is what Yonarnim will do. We fully trust and believe that she will do, and if she doesn't, she will get a lot of help. Believe me, she will get a lot of help. But then that will complete the mission of the true Eve and the true Mother. All right, that's my rima for. Those are my rimas are from the Bible and the Cheonseonggyung today, and this idea of champumo, the correct translation being true parent in the singular, in most contexts, there will be some places where it's obvious that he's referring to himself and mother, and in that case, it can be translated in the plural. But I think probably in about 75-80% of the context, it's going. If we go back through and correct our translations, it's going to be in the singular, where and mother right now is calling herself true parent, and that's wrong. That's wrong. She cannot refer to herself as true parent. That is absolutely wrong. Anyway, let's talk about that on another occasion, and I'm sure there'll be many occasions to refer to that, because this is quite a change in our understanding of the English translation of Father's words. And if you're going to blame the translators, just remember, you only have yourself to blame. Father told you to learn Korean, so you only have yourself to blame. All right, let's take a break now, and we'll come back and start going through the news of the day from a Cheongguk perspective. See you in a minute.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for July 15, 2017. The 8th year of Cheongi, the second 5th month, and the 22nd day. And by the way, another thing that has come up in the OSTP Absolute Sex Education that is ending today is the reason that we are using the Cheongi calendar. Reverend Yu explained that of course, in the Old Testament, there's the idea of the Sabbath, where you take a break every 7 years, and then when you have 7 Sabbaths, so 7 times 7 is 49, and then the following year, the 50th year, is the Jubilee year, and he points out that Father is the. He said that no one had victory in terms of the Jubilee year. The people had victory in the 7-year periods, but no one had victory in the Jubilee, in the 50-year period. And he says that Father needed to completely restore all of Adam's failures. I have to go back and check my notes, but he needed to do what he needed to do. He needed to do everything he was going to do within those 50 years, within the 50-year period. And that 50-year period began with his holy blessing in 1960 and ended in 2010. During that 50-year period, that was when Father had to do everything that he was going to do on earth. So in 2010, when that was accomplished, he declared the heavenly calendar. That is why 2010 is the beginning of our calendar. And so 2010 being the first year of, and he gave the name of that sort of that era, I could say, as being Chungi. Chun, of course, meaning heaven, and Ki meaning a foundation or base. And so 2010 is year one. And now, today, and so 2010 being year one, 2017 then is year number 8. So this is the 8th year of Chungi. Of course, Family Federation has thrown that away, as they've done with, they're doing with everything else that Father did. They've thrown that away, and they've started their own calendar, 2013, because that is, the time when that old man that they hate disappeared, and now Mother was able to rule and usurp Father's position. So that marks their usurpation. Their calendar marks the beginning of their usurpation, the rule of usurpation. So, but in the second king, of course, is continuing Father's calendar, and so that is why this is the 8th year of Chungi, and so just to make sure that there's no confusion on that, and of course we've already explained in previous a couple of weeks ago why this is the second fifth month, and just to remind you, this is the heavenly calendar, and Father said that in the heavenly calendar, the solar and lunar calendars would support the heavenly calendar from the Cain and Abel positions. The solar calendar being in the Cain position and the lunar calendar being in the Abel position. And the Koreans call their calendar, the traditional calendar, the lunar calendar, but it's actually not a lunar calendar. It is a solar lunar calendar. I think the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar, and that would be a calendar. That is a calendar where you basically you ignore the movement of the sun. That's just by the moon. And what happens then is that every year there is a 11-day, or approximately 11-day difference between the solar year and the lunar, and the 12 solar months and 12 lunar months. And so that each year the Islamic calendar and other pure lunar calendars will fall behind the solar calendar by approximately 11 days. After 3 years, this gets to be about 33 days or so, approximately. And so after 3 years, what are called the solar lunar calendars, which the traditional Korean calendar is one of those, the solar lunar calendars will then insert an extra month into the lunar calendar in order to catch up, so to speak, with the solar calendar, so that every 3 years or so, approximately, it's actually not exactly 3 years, it's 7 times out of 19 years, the lunar calendar will have 13 months. And so this year, the heavenly calendar has 13 months, because we don't add it to, we don't say, okay, we don't add it to after the 12th month. Instead, it is inserted somewhere in the year, and it is given the second X month and after the month that precedes it. So last month was the 5th month in the heavenly calendar, and we need to insert a 13th month here, and so it's being called the second fifth month. And the decision on when and where to insert these months is made by an official government agency in South Korea. There's actually, yes, it's the Astronomical Observatory, the government astronomical observatory that makes these decisions and announces it. And it's a little bit different from the Chinese solar lunar calendar, by the way, because the Chinese their traditional calendar is not inserting the 13th month after as the second fifth month. They are inserting their 13th month this year as the second sixth month. And so people who are aware of the Chinese calendar and think that that is actually the solar lunar calendar for the entire world are maybe a little bit confused because and that has to do with the fact that there is a 1 hour time difference between Seoul and Beijing. Then it gets kind of complicated. So, and I'm actually still studying that situation myself. How it is that the 1 hour time difference between Seoul and Beijing means that the Korean solar lunar calendar inserts the 13th month after the 5th month, whereas and in China it comes after the 6th month. So 1 hour difference makes that difference. So anyway, that was an explanation of why this is the 8th year of Cheongi, because Father began the new era in the Jubilee year of 2010, 50 years after his holy blessing, and in 1960. All right, President Trump was in France yesterday, and according to his tweets last night, he will be in Bedminster, New Jersey today at the USGA U.S. Women's Open. But yesterday he was in France. Let's just do this video here.
The French people rose up and stormed the Bastille. It changed the course of human history.
Okay, you're not hearing the sound, but he is saying that he's giving his Bastille Day address and saying that the French people rose up and stormed the Bastille and changed the course of human history.
Our two nations are forever joined together by the spirit of revolution.
And our two nations are forever joined together by the spirit of revolution.
And the fight for freedom.
And the fight for freedom.
France is America's first and oldest ally.
France is America's first and oldest ally.
Ever since General Lafayette joined the American fight for independence.
Ever since General Lafayette joined the American fight for independence.
Our fates and fortunes have been tied unequivocally together.
Our fates and fortunes have been tied unequivocally together. Okay, he's a politician. All right. Okay, he's a politician.
1 century ago, the United States entered
1 century ago, the United States entered the First World War.
World War I. French and American patriots have fought together, bled together, and died
French and American patriots have fought together, bled together, and died together
in the fight for our countries.
In the fight for our countries. All right, well, that's a very nice address written by someone, I'm sure. Of course, France is, as he said, America's first ally, and actually it was kind of due to French help that America was able to, ragtag militias were finally able to defeat the superpower of that time in the late 18th century. Referring, of course, to England. And that, of course, has been an important fact in American history. At the 100th anniversary of the U.S. independence, France sent us a statue, the Statue of Liberty, which is still standing there in New York Harbor. And then now, President Trump refers to the fact that 100 years ago this year, the United States entered the First World War, where things were actually looking kind of bleak on the Western Front in Europe, and the United States was able to join there and bring the war to an end in 1918. And certainly France and the United States have bled together and died together for the cause of freedom, also in the Second World War as well. Today, of course, Macron, the French president, is very much of a strong supporter of Europe, and he is actually working with Germany's Chancellor Merkel to strengthen the European Union, which is, of course, goes against President Trump's foreign policy objectives. President Trump is a sovereignty candidate. He supports sovereignty, and this is why the second king is so strongly supporting him, because this is a time in world history where sovereignty needs to be supported, because there is an effort, and Macron is a part of this effort. There's an effort right now to take sovereignty away from countries and from citizens, and to give that sovereignty to the international elite class, and so call it the Davos class, or the Bilderberg group, and also turns out also the Sun Valley class. Right now, in a fancy resort called Sun Valley, there's a conference going on where Jared and Kushner and Ivanka Trump are also attending, and here Breitbart refers to that conference and the attendees as the mothership of global elitism. Here's a photograph of Jared and Ivanka here, with somebody turning their back to us. And then, when it comes to elitism, the Sun Valley Conference that Jared Kushner is attending this week is worse than Davos, according to MSNBC anchor and Wall Street expert Stephanie Ruhle. Not often that we're referring to MSNBC in a positive light, but in this case, MSNBC seems to be in a rare moment of intelligence. Breitbart News has led the charge in reporting on those in the bipartisan party of Davos who put the global interests and the opinions of the middle and financial elites above what is often best for Americans. And this goes against Cheongguk, and this is why the second king is so much against it, because in Cheongguk, Father came to liberate and give complete freedom to citizens of Cheongguk. And so this idea of the world being ruled by a self-appointed elitist class, a kind of aristocracy. The aristocracy we thought the aristocracy was destroyed by the end of monarchism, but it turns out that there is still a flow, or somehow that has been inherited through the time. It's kind of like a vampire that won't die. That it's coming out of its coffin again, and so we have now this aristocracy, or they call it elitist, but let's call it what it is. It's an aristocracy. It's a self-appointed aristocracy that is also hereditary, like the aristocracy is, and is trying to set things up so that they rule the world, because they believe that they want us to believe that they are the intelligent people, and they know how to bring about a world that is best for everyone. But that's not true. When American democracy started in the late 18th century, the aristocrats in Europe sort of poo-pooed it and laughed at it, saying, how can you have a country without an aristocracy, without a king and an aristocracy? Because after all, you have to have people who are educated and who are smart and who knows what's what, and how to run a country, and those are the people you have to give your country to. And this idea that common people could rule themselves and be successful at it was simply laughed at and mocked by the late 18th century kings and aristocracy. and that's also what is happening with the deep state, because the deep state in America today considers itself to be a kind of an aristocracy, a kind of a professional ruling class, and then they say that, oh, no matter who is president, we're going to run the country. We're going to run the country. We're going to make the policies, and those politicians can pretend to run the country, but we're going to be the ones who are actually running the country. And they had it set up so that actually they could, in most cases, they could get a president that they could work with. They would work it so that the Democratic nominee for president and the Republican nominee for president would both be people that they could work with. But now they have a person that they cannot work with. They have President Trump, and they just cannot work with him, and so they are doing everything they can to try and get rid of him. In other words, to overturn the results of the 2016 presidential election, or at least to get Pence into power, because I think they probably believe that they can work with the current vice president. So if they can get him into the presidency, then they believe that they can work with him. Let's see. Breitbart News has led that charge. And on Thursday, Rule said that for all the criticisms you hear about things like the World Economic Forum in Davos, that is exactly what Sun Valley is. Rule, who has the rare ability to talk about complex financial issues in ways average Americans can understand while also viewing financial news through the lens of people who it's intended for, said these conferences are the mothership of global elitism. She added that Sun Valley is worse than Davos because there is not even the pretense of solving the world's problems while attendees are hobnobbing. These are not the forgotten Americans, Rule said. These are the absolute chosen ones. She said, only the most elite of the elite of the elite attend. Rule said the Sun Valley Conference was held at one of the most expensive ski resorts on the planet, where attendees can also go horseback riding and whitewater rafting. Bloomberg Businessweek editor Megan Murphy said she was astounded that Kushner was there this week. According to Variety, Kushner and Ivanka Trump arrived on Wednesday at Sun Valley Lodge, a bucolic retreat adorned with pools, tennis courts, and rolling hills. Kushner reportedly mingled with CBS boss Leslie Moonves, according to Variety. The annual conference draws a number of big names from Hollywood and Silicon Valley: Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, Time Warner chief Jeff Buch, how do you spell that? I pronounce that, Jeff Bukes, maybe. ICM partners Chris Silberman and producer Brian Grazer are among the guests this year. Here are some other attendees spotted at Sun Valley. So there you have, of course, Zuckerberg, and there you have Rupert Murdoch and his one of his sons, and who's this? Apple's Tim Cook and Eddie Q. And these guys trying very hard to dress down and look like they are just common people on the way to the supermarket. Just nothing. Just here, common people dressed in $10,000 T-shirts. Anyway, so and Jared Kushner is there, and of course. Jared and Ivanka Trump have been Democrats for a long time, and they are part of the Manhattan elite. And one of the challenges that President Trump has had is that he loves his daughter, and he trusts his daughter. He knows that his daughter has a lot of abilities, and he knows that his son has a lot of abilities. But he's been having a hard time separating his... He's had a hard time separating the dad aspect of himself from the president's aspect of himself, unfortunately, and that has been very bad, of course, for the country. This is the Breitbart News coverage of President Trump's visit to France. Donald Trump affirms U.S. solidarity with France against terror and anniversary of Nice Islamic terror attack. Because last year on this day, on Bastille Day, the anniversary of the French Revolution, the Islamic terrorists attacked in Nice and killed 86 people, not with guns, but with a truck. As U.S. President Donald Trump returned home to the U.S. from France on the one-year anniversary of an Islamic terror attack in Nice, France, Trump pledged solidarity with France against terror. After 2 days in Paris to commemorate both Bastille Day and the 100th anniversary of U.S. entry into World War I, President Trump tweeted, "The United States mourns for the victims of Nice, France. We pledge our solidarity with France against terror." Isn't it interesting that the British decided not to have our president to step on their soil, but France did. In a joint press conference with the French President Emmanuel Macron, held after a bilateral meeting between the two world leaders, the two presidents pledged to strengthen cooperative efforts to root out and defeat terrorism. Trump mentioned the July 14, 2016 Islamic terror attack on Bastille Day celebrants in Nice during the joint conference. We remember that how horrible that was. We mourn the 86 lives that were stolen, and we pray for their loved ones, he said. He went on to speak of stripping terrorists of their territory, their funding, their networks, and their ideological support. Of course, he said that in a joint news conference, which means that Macron was standing next to him, and Macron is one of the people who want the EU to open up their doors to migrants from Islamic countries, a certain percentage of whom are terrorists. Even if it's a small minority, it's still, when you consider the absolute numbers involved, hundreds of thousands and millions of people coming to Europe from North Africa and Middle East, even a small minority, so 10% or 5% of that is still quite a few terrorists coming into Europe, determined not to assimilate into European culture, but to Islamicize European culture, European nations, and to carry out violence against Christians, and not just Christians, but what their view of Christians is not people who go to church, but basically Europeans or white Europeans are Christians in their mind. And so that Macron is one of those people that needs to actually change their attitude and join with President Trump in stripping terrorists of their territory, their funding, their networks, and their ideological support. Because the French ideology, the whole global elitist ideology, Macron's ideology, is supporting terrorists today. ISIS claimed responsibility for the Nice terror attack. Tunisian-born man drove a cargo truck down the Promenade d'Angles into a crowd, killing 86 and injuring hundreds more. So he didn't do it with guns. He did it with a truck. On Friday, President Trump and Macron took part in the Bastille Day commemoration, including a parade in which military bands spelled out the names of French cities, and et cetera. And France has seen a string of Islamic terror attacks over the past 3 years, including the attack on French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo that killed 12, and shots fired and an explosive detonated in a coordinated attack on a soccer match, cafes, and a concert hall that killed 130 in late 2015. As of late May, listen carefully now, as of late May, there have been a terror attack every 9 days in 2017 occurring either in the UK, Europe, or Russia. As of late May, there have been a terror attack every 9 days in 2017 occurring either in UK, Europe, or Russia. But they say it's not Islamic terrorism. Okay. So now, of course, the mainstream media, I don't know if mainstream media is the right word to use, because more and more Breitbart is getting into the mainstream, and other, alternative media are now becoming less alternative and more mainstream. So we're going to have to think of a new name for that. I think pretty soon, maybe like something like the globalist media. That might be a good candidate. Is still concentrating on Russia, and normal Americans are just not falling for it. here on Breitbart, there's an article that says the angry Heartland voters think media using Russia stories to oust Trump. Yeah, we've got it figured out. We know what you're doing. Voters who live in the heartland and outside the New York, D.C. media bubbles do not care about the legacy medias. Okay, that's I guess that's the legacy media seems to be Breitbart's word for it. I don't know. Because legacy media, that doesn't mean anything to me. Legacy media. How did they come? What is that supposed to mean? I like a globalist media. Globalist media. I like that better. Do not care about legacy media's obsession with Russia. An Iowa radio news director emailed CNN media reporter Brian Stelter, out of all people, on Thursday to tell him that conservatives in his state are very angry at the legacy press. Globalist press. Isn't that better? Because they think the media are using Russia stories to oust and delegitimize President Donald Trump. You see, it's the aristocracy. It is the elitist aristocracy, the deep state aristocracy, that until now, they said, okay, whether Democrat or Republican is elected, either one we can control. They will stick to the script. So we don't care which one wins. But now they have a guy who's not cooperating and is actually trying to defeat the deep state. And so and the deep state and the media are all part of this aristocracy, this elitist group, this ruling class, this self-appointed ruling class. And they are trying to delegitimize Donald Trump. And Americans have it figured out. You see, the Americans have it figured out. Not quite as stupid, not quite as stupid as Hillary, in the basket of deplorables, as she said. Not quite that, Hillary, not quite. Quote, they think the Trump-Russia deal is a coup attempt by the media. They don't think there is anything to Russia-Trump Jr. emails. Robert Leonard, the news director, emailed. They don't understand why the media is trying to oust our duly elected president. But we should understand why they are trying to oust our duly elected president. It's because they want to run the country, and they can't do that, or it's more difficult for them to do that as long as Trump is there in the White House. They think there is a double standard. Why isn't anyone investigating the Clinton campaign Russia connections? They are standing firm behind Trump. According to a recent Harvard-Harris poll, nearly two-thirds of Americans believe that, quote, there exists a campaign to delegitimize, unquote, Trump. Two-thirds of Americans believe that there is a campaign to delegitimize Trump. Reporters have gone to working-class areas in the states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Kentucky, and even Tennessee have all reported similar sentiments. CNN, though, keeps focusing on Russia, even though one of its anchors, Alison Camerata, said on Friday that she was actually experiencing Russia fatigue. A media research center found, for instance, that Camerata's CNN morning show New Day spent a whopping 93% of its airtime on Wednesday on Trump-Russia stories. 93% of its airtime on Wednesday on Trump-Russia stories. Wow, it's amazing that anyone watches CNN. Wow, yeah. All right, let's take a short break right now, and we'll come back in a minute or so with more news from a Chonu perspective. I guess we'll take a 5-minute break.
on their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God won't let them be defeated. Every child has a dream to belong and be loved. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love the least of these, then they will be brave and free. Shout your name in victory. When we love the least of these, when we love the least of these. Break our hearts once again. Help us to remember when we were only children hoping for a friend. Won't you look around? These are the lives that the world has forgotten, waiting for doors of our hearts and our homes to open. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love the least of these, then they will be brave and free. Shout your name in victory. When we love the least of these, when we love the least of these. If not us, who will be like Jesus to the least of these? If not us, tell me who will be like Jesus to the least of these. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love. Little hands, shoeless feet, lonely eyes looking back at me. Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve?
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Welcome back to the King's Report for July 15th, 2017. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon, and we're going through some of the news. And, you know, on a Saturday morning, it's nice to have a good animal story with everything else that's going on in the human world. And there's a dog that has given birth to a green puppy. This happened in the UK. 3-year-old Rio gave birth to 9 puppies, but when one came out mint green, Louise Sutherland was gobsmacked. When he gave birth to a green puppy. A dog owner couldn't believe what she was seeing when her golden retriever gave birth to a green puppy. Her beloved pet Rio at age 3 gave birth last week to 9 puppies, but when one came out mint green, Louise Sutherland was stunned. And there you see the green puppy there. I guess that's the one right here, if you can see my cursor there, and with the proud mother there as well. Oops, looks like we're about to lose that story. No, it came back okay. and it has to do with, actually, there's a scientific explanation for this. It is caused by a bile pigment called biliverdin that is found in the placenta of dogs, which can stain the puppy's coat when it mixes with the mother's amniotic fluid, the liquid that protects her pups. Mrs. Sutherland from Goldsby in the Highlands has now named the pup Forrest in recognition of the unusual shade. This rare occurrence is only known to have happened only 3 times in the world. She said the first pup was stuck, so myself and my daughter Claire managed to free him and pull him out to safely. It was all hands on deck, but then as the puppies started to arrive, we noticed that one of the puppies had green fur. We couldn't believe it. When we checked it out later, we found out it is very unusual and has to do with the placenta. The color has faded quite a bit already and will be gone soon, I'm told. We named him Forrest. Well, isn't that nice? Thank you for that respite from the terrible, terrible news, which we have to get back to now. America sees an alarming spike in middle school suicide rate. This is in the USA Today. America is experiencing a striking rise in suicide among middle school students. The suicide rate among 10 to 14-year-olds doubled between 07 and 14, for the first time surpassing the death rate in that age group from car crashes, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In 2014 alone, 425 middle schoolers nationwide took their own lives. It is alarming. We're even getting cases involving 6 and 9-year-olds, said Clark Flatt, who started the Jason Foundation in Tennessee 20 years ago to help educate teachers about teen suicide after his 16-year-old son took his own life. It's scary. This isn't an emerging problem. It's here. Researchers, educators, and psychologists say several factors: increased pressure on students to achieve academically, more economic uncertainty, increased fear of terrorism and social media are behind the rise in suicides among the young. The use of social media is a particular worry because it has amped up bullying among a vulnerable age group. Young students in prior generations left school each afternoon and avoided someone who bullied them until the next day or week. Now social media allows for bullying 24/7, and the bully doesn't even have to be someone the child knows. With social media, you can turn people off. Phyllis Alongi, clinical director at the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide, a group funded by parents in Monmouth County whose children died by suicide. Social media has also been behind the spread of dangerous phenomena like the blue whale challenge, which is recently rumored to have encouraged a handful of suicides of young people around the world. The game asks players to attempt daily tasks that include everything from watching horror films and self-mutilation. The parents of a 15-year-old Texas boy said this week that their son was participating in the challenge when he was found hanging in his closet, his cell phone propped up so it could broadcast his death. There is so much pressure on young people that they can become overwhelmed because they haven't yet developed the coping skills adults rely on, something an adult easily dismisses because of a lifetime of experience can be hard for a middle schooler to shrug off. Middle school is a very difficult time, said Maurice Elias, a psychologist at Rutgers University and director of its social emotional learning lab. It's a challenging age, as some start puberty before others and some are discerning their sexual orientation. They are trying to figure out who they are, Elias said. They are very sensitive to criticism, so they are particularly prone to suicidal ideation and even action. A lot of times they exaggerate the situation. If it's a little thing, they think it's a huge thing. If someone doesn't like them, they think that nobody will like them forever. The statistics are heartbreaking. Nationwide, the annual rate climbed from 0.9 to 2.1 suicides per 100,000 middle schoolers between 2007 and 2014. Wow, that's quite a hefty rise from 0.9 to 2.1. That's more than double. That's a double plus another third, so about 130% increase. The cause of suicides can be complicated, and each case is different. A suicide is never the result of a single factor, experts say. Increasing the risk of suicide can be a lot of interacting pieces, from family issues to other stressors, said Patricia Wright, executive director of the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association and former chair of the state's anti-bullying task force. As experts say that to reduce suicide among teens, parents and teachers need education about warning signs. These can include changes in feelings, displays of distress, a sense of hopelessness, a change in appetite, sleep loss, lost interest in hobbies, or giving away favored possessions, he said. Parents need to speak to their children if they think something is wrong. Always err on the side of asking questions, Flatt said, and don't accept their first answer that everything is fine, especially if they are acting differently. Let's continue on this story. He said his son Jason was a regular 16-year-old who loved sports and got B's in school. But the B's became D's, and Jason failed to finish homework. Then Jason, who loved football, came out on the front step of their home and told his dad that he no longer wanted to play. I thought he had been through a tough spring practice and was tired, Flatt recalled. I said, you certainly don't have to play on my account, but why don't you wait to decide until August? I lost him 3 weeks later. I hadn't asked him why he didn't want to play anymore. It's tough to sit across from your son and ask if he's thinking about hurting himself, Flatt said. If he says yes, he's put his life in your hands, and you need to know how to deal with it. Don't learn what you should do after the fact. In the years since, he has spoken with hundreds of kids who attempted suicide, and they all said that no one ever asked them if they wanted to hurt themselves. If you already think no one loves you or cares, and then nobody asks if you're okay, that just reinforces what they're thinking, Flatt said. Research has shown that 4 of 5 teens who attempt suicide showed warning signs beforehand. Flatt said if we can train people to recognize those signs and respond, we can reduce the numbers, he said. Longy agreed the top myth about suicide is that if I talk about suicide, I'm planting the idea in their heads, she said. The top myth about suicide is that if I talk about suicide, I'm planting the idea in their heads, she said. Experts also say schools need to create a welcoming environment where all students feel accepted, and to teach students the social and emotional skills that will help them navigate conflict. Training educators is essential, experts say. Training teachers is the single most impactful thing a state can do, said Flatt, whose foundation has helped 19 states pass the Jason Flatt Act, which requires suicide prevention as part of teacher training. Concerns about suicide were also part of the reason the state passed an anti-bullying act in 2006. Most bullying cases occur in a school setting, said Stuart Green, director of the New Jersey Coalition for Bullying Awareness and Prevention. It's the responsibility of the adults who staff these schools. Green and others say addressing bullying not only helps those targeted, but also helps the bullies. We're not dealing with a bunch of little Hannibal Lecters, he said. That behavior can change. If not, they grow up with problems when dealing with the workplace where bullying isn't tolerated. Wow. My wife and I raised 3 children who are now, our youngest one is, 28? She was born in 88, so she's, 29, I'm sorry. Oh, she's 28. Yeah, she'll be 29 in a couple of months. She's 28. That was our youngest one, and the older ones are in their early 30s. And yeah, the teenage years, sometimes you wonder how they survive to and definitely things are much more difficult for teenagers than I remember what it was for me when I was a teenager quite a few years ago. And this is quite disturbing that in 7 years, between 2007 and 2014, the suicide rate among 10 to 14-year-olds has risen from 0.9 per 100,000 to 2.1 per 100,000. We hope that that increase will not continue. Of course, I think a lot of this, the various experts are quoted here, but they're really not talking about some of the fundamental issues here, and that is that children are society creates problems for children. For example, you can choose your sexual orientation, and that's one of the things here that children this age are trying to figure out what is their sexual orientation, whether they're straight or gay, and and these days they have list of dozens of genders, and so that people can choose from, and this is a false problem. It's creating a problem where one doesn't exist. Your sexual orientation is decided when the sperm meets the ovum. And if it's a sperm that is designed to produce a boy, then you're going to be a boy. And if it's a sperm that is designed to produce a girl, it's going to be a girl. But society, American and also European and other societies affected by America and Europe, including Japan and Korea and I guess many other societies around the world, have created a situation where kids are taught that you may be a girl with a penis or you may be a boy with a vagina, which is simply ridiculous, and it's not true. And so this falsehood is part of the problem, I would say, and it's probably one of the reasons I would if we want to talk about some of the reasons that we've seen this increase from 0.9 per 100,000 to 2.1 per 100,000 suicides among 10 to 14-year-olds. I would list that as one of them. God is a God of principle, order, and law, and He creates us either as male or female. And so this was when my child was in, when our youngest child especially was in elementary school. This was one of my concerns that she may be brainwashed to believe that she might be gay. So one day I actually asked her, "Are you gay?" After she had become quite a bit older, not when she was in elementary school. And she was shocked at the question and said, "No, she's not gay." And I never believed that she was gay, but I had to ask the question because I thought that she might have been brainwashed into believing that there were these choices that could be made. And that's a very uncomfortable thing for a parent to watch when their child is in public school, because this is the kind of brainwashing that they receive in the public school setting. I think if I were to, advise or if I were to raise children again, I would definitely not put them in public school. You have to keep them close to the family. I think, training experts and all the experts talking, but I think basically you have to keep them close to the family and talk with them frequently. One of the parenting skills that the Second King has exhibited, which I admire very much and which I certainly recommend to everyone, is this idea of having a day for each particular child. They have 5 children, and from time to time they will have a particular day set aside for a particular child, and they will take that child out to dinner or go someplace like that, and so there is 100% of their attention is focused on that child for that time. And I can remember doing that, a few times in my family with our children as they were growing up. And looking back, those times were successful, and they created memories for the kids, and also helped a lot in communication, and helped a lot in my understanding the child. And I wish that I had done it on a much more regular basis, as the second king and Yonanim are doing. I think I would have been a much more successful parent if I had done that. So yeah, I think that here it says talk with your kids, but yeah, I mean, of course you have to start at an early age, because if you don't start at an early age, then the kids get to a point where you ask them, "How's your day?" "Fine," and "fine" is the only word you hear. Fine. And they don't want their parents to interfere in their lives beyond the word "fine," and that's a very dangerous situation, because then things start happening in their hearts and in their minds that where they need their parents, they need parental love. They need parental love. In the OSTP Absolute Sex Education, the point is made that of course the family is the basic unit of the kingdom of heaven, and we can only enter the kingdom of heaven as a family. But then within the family, there are three sort of basic relationships. That is the parent-child relationship, father and mother with the sons and daughter. So the parents, and then you have the parents, you have the husband-wife relationship, and then you have the children. So the children relationship, and the sibling relationships are there too, but that's included in the children's relationship. So you have parents, husband, wife, children. Those three elements come together to make a family, and those relationships need to be cultivated constantly in order to create a successful family. The global elitists have succeeded in breaking down our families. Their families are strong. But they have succeeded in breaking down our families through the public school propaganda and through the other laws that they have passed, through many, many laws that they have passed that encourage divorce, that encourage alienation of children from parents. Educators, there are many good teachers, great teachers, and so I don't want to disparage all teachers, but there are quite a few educators who believe that it is their duty to pull the children away from their parents, because their parents' values are old-fashioned or wrong or are oppressive or are part of or are hate-filled or racist or whatever. So it is their duty to pull their children away from their parents. And I experienced this. I saw parents, teachers trying to pull our children away because they knew that we were members of the Unification Church, and they believed, and the teachers believed that this was a cult, and it was their duty to pull our children away from this cult. But the result is now that you see this rise in 0.9 to 2.1 per 100,000 suicides in middle schools. This is what the teachers have done by pulling the children away from their parents. They have only themselves to blame. And now they're trying to educate teachers on how to spot signs of early signs of suicide. But what we need to do is to restore the family, relationships. And I think one very good way, one excellent way would be to come to an understanding of God's creation, come to an understanding of God and His creation, and understand that God has created us male and female, and to not brainwash these kids into this idea that they have these false choices that they need to make. And bullying, well, the Second King's answer to bullying is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think a child who is confident that he can handle himself will be confident enough to stand up to a bully. And that's what you have to do with a bully. You have to stand up to him, because bullies are cowards. In almost every case, I would say, maybe every case, bullies are cowards. The reason they come on strong is because they are afraid of someone else coming on strong to them. And so if a child can learn a martial art such as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's probably the best one to learn, they can, first of all, they go out with an attitude of confidence. And bullies pick on kids who don't appear confident, who seem to be unsure about themselves. Those are the easy targets. Bullies pick on easy targets. And just imbuing the child with a confidence through the knowledge of martial arts will help him not be a target of bullying. And of course, online bullying is something that is new and is something that I'm not so familiar with. But I think encouraging your children not to spend so much time on these social media by encouraging them to spend more time in nature, for example, as a family, and activities as a family would seem to be a good way to avoid this. But I think here too, I think confidence, helping a child develop confidence in himself or herself, will also be a response to a way to avoid bullying from the start. So before you start looking for signs of suicide, I think just helping children develop confidence overall is what needs to be done. So that's a few words from someone who has gone through some successes, many failures, and somehow by the grace of God, all three children are doing well now. Of course, we went through many, many rough patches, but somehow they've come out where they are, and they've come out at the other end of that tunnel, and they're doing quite well. And of course, they could be doing better. If we had been better parents, they could be doing better. But, we learn. Each generation has to learn from the past. And the current generation has the opportunity to learn from the second king of Cheongguk, who is quite excellent in teaching parenting skills. Of course, his children are going through the teenage years themselves. But as I watched his children go through those years, they are certainly doing quite a bit better, I would say, than the average child. His children are very, very blessed to have such wonderful parents. Because the second king is quite observant and is able to analyze situations and come up with solutions. And of course, he is going through a process of gaining experience as well. But I would say that he's quite a bit ahead of most parents. And I think anyone with a child would do themselves a favor and do their children a favor by tuning into his parenting advice and applying that advice to their own situations. All right, let's take a break now and come back in a minute or so with more news from a Cheongguk perspective.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, It's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Carr Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit carr.com today.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Welcome back to the King's Report for July 15th, 2017. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon, and we're going through some of the news from a Cheongguk perspective. And this segment, I wanted to cover this, since we're talking about family, cover this thing with where the Trump administration, or the Supreme Court, I guess, the Supreme Court approved the reinstatement of the Trump administration's travel ban on the 6 Muslim majority countries, but exempted people who have bona fide relationships in the United States. And in those bona fide relationships, they included, of course, the jobs, and in other words, relationships with the companies in America, and also family relationships. And then, but the Supreme Court did not define family relationships, and so the Trump administration did that, and they excluded grandparents, and they excluded cousins, and so forth. And so now, a judge in Hawaii has issued a ruling where grandparents and cousins are included, and so he is kind of overruled, or I don't know what you call it. How do you, this is sort of a, I don't know, I see it as a judicial overreach, but anyway, he has made this a change in the Trump. So he's assuming the authority to just change the executive's policy, and I'm not sure how this works in the separation of powers. That can the judiciary just sort of rewrite a policy like that? Anyway, so now the Trump administration late Friday appealed directly to the U.S. Supreme Court after a federal judge in Hawaii ordered to expand the list of U.S. family relationships that refugees and visitors from 6 Muslim-majority countries can use to get into the country, including grandparents and grandchildren. U.S. District Judge Derek Watson's decision on President Trump's travel ban has reopened a window for tens of thousands of refugees to enter the United States. In its appeal, the U.S. Justice Department said Watson's interpretation of the Supreme Court's ruling on what family relationships qualify refugees and visitors from 6 Muslim-majority countries to enter the United States empties the court's decision of meaning, as it encompasses not just close family members, but virtually all family members. Treating all of these relationships as close family relationships reads the term close out of the court's decision. Only this court can definitively settle whether the government's reasonable implementation is consistent with this court's stay, the Justice Department said. Watson's ruling Thursday was the latest twist in a long, tangled legal fight that will culminate with arguments before the nation's high court in October. It could help more than 24,000 refugees who had already been vetted and approved by the United States, but would have been barred by the 120-day freeze on refugee admissions, said Becca Heller, director of the International Refugee Assistance Project, a resettlement agency. Many of them had already sold all of their belongings to start their new lives in safety. She said the decision gives back hope to so many who would otherwise be stranded indefinitely. Citing a need to review its vetting process to ensure national security, the administration capped refugee admissions at 50,000 for the 12-month period ending September 30, a ceiling it hit this week. A federal budget can accommodate up to 75,000 refugees, but admissions have slowed under Mr. Trump, and the government could hold them to a trickle, resettlement agencies say. See, these are people whose jobs depend on refugees continuing to come in. If refugees stop coming, then these people are going to lose their jobs. And so, yeah, they want more people to come. And the effect on national security, but my job. Absolutely, this is good news for refugees, but and for the people whose jobs depend on the refugees. But there's a lot of uncertainties, said Melanie Nezra, spokeswoman for HAIAS, a resettlement agency. It's really going to depend on how the administration reacts to this. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the administration will seek the Supreme Court to weigh in, bypassing the San Francisco-based Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which has ruled against it in the case. The administration took a first step by filing a notice of appeal to the Ninth Circuit, allowing it to use a rule to petition the High Court directly. There is no timetable for the Supreme Court to act, but the administration will be seeking quick action that clarifies the court's June opinion. The justices are now scattered during their summer recess, so any short-term action would come in written filings. The administration has lost most legal challenges on the travel ban, which applies to citizens of Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Iran, and Yemen. And Iran, among those 6 countries, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Iran, and Yemen, 5 of those 6 countries are not among the top 10 Muslim populations in the world. Only Iran is among the top 10 Muslim populations in the world. And yet some media keep calling it the ban on Muslims or something like that. If that were true, Indonesia would be at the top of the list because it has the largest Muslim population, but it's not. The Supreme Court's ruling exempted a large swath of refugees and travelers with a bona fide relationship with a person or an entity in the U.S. The justices did not define the relationships, but said they could include a close relative, a job offer, or admission to a college or university. The Trump administration defined the relationships as people who had a parent, spouse, fiance, son, daughter, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, or sibling already in the U.S. Watson enlarged that group to include grandparents, grandchildren, brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and cousins. Hawaii Attorney General Douglas S. Chin, who sought the broader definition, said Thursday's ruling makes clear that the U.S. government may not ignore the scope of the partial travel ban as it sees fit. Family members have been separated, and real people have suffered enough. Real people are suffering from the incredible influx of migrants, a certain percentage of whom have not been properly vetted and come into a country for the purpose of not of assimilating into that country, but of changing that country's culture and of undermining that country's sovereignty. And of course, this appears to be another attempt by those who would destroy American sovereignty and just open America's borders to anyone who wants to come in, and just completely destroy the Christian civilization that has been the Judeo-Christian civilization that has been built up here. Father said that that America has to return to its original spirit. That was a Judeo-Christian spirit, and the people who have come in over the last couple of centuries have been assimilating into this American culture, American Judeo-Christian spirit. But there are certain people that do not want to do that, but want to undermine that, and those people need to be vetted out. And the Trump administration is trying to have more time and more careful vetting of people in order to protect America's sovereignty. This Hawaii judge ruling is another example of how that is being made as difficult as possible. Another example of the ruling elite, the self-proclaimed aristocracy, trying to run the country according to how they see fit. News from the Associated Press: White House says budget deficit to be $99 billion higher this year. The White House Budget Office says the budget deficit is going to be larger than expected this year by $99 billion. The Office of Management and Budget points to worsening tax revenues to explain why its forecast 2 months ago is off the mark. The budget deficit is now expected to be $702 billion this year. Last year's deficit registered at $585 billion. So that's more than $100 billion. That's more than $100 billion more. So when it says $99 billion higher, they're comparing it to what the original expectation. They're not comparing it to last year's deficit, but to their own expectation. And if you compare to last year's deficit, It's what is that? About $17 billion higher. The White House kept its budget report to a bare bones minimum and cast blame on the failed policies of the previous administration. Of course, that's what politicians always do. But anyway, the OMB report comes after a Congressional Budget Office analysis scuttled White House claims that its May budget, if implemented to the letter, would balance the federal ledger within 10 years. But from a Chinese perspective, the Chinese Constitution, the federal government needs to divest itself of a lot of the functions that it is currently performing, and then that will cut down on that will be a way to cut down on spending. One example that I like to bring up, because I think it's one that people can understand, is the national parks. As a first step, not as the ultimate solution, but as a first step, the national parks, the land can continue to be owned by the federal government, but then private nonprofit organizations can be set up by those who are interested in the parks and have a vested interest in the parks to manage and to provide the services that are necessary in the parks. And this is what the Central Park Conservancy is doing in New York, where Central Park was a crime-infested, very extremely dirty place until the people living around there decided to do something about it and got together and put their money together and formed a private nonprofit organization. It's a 501c3. Tax-exempt organization called the Central Park Conservancy, and it manages a Central Park, and it provides a large chunk of the operating budget for Central Park. And the Central Park, under their management, has been cleaned up and has become a pretty safe place, as safe as you can be in Manhattan. And this kind of model could be expanded, and where it looks like it's very possible that we're going to have a government shutdown later this year, perhaps next month or in September. And when that happens, the media is going to scream, about the national parks, they're all being closed because the government shutdown, and of course, that will be used to put pressure on the Trump administration to go along with whatever demands that the Democrats and also the Rhino Republicans are making against Trump, and they will use the national parks for that purpose. I know this because that's been their pattern in the past. And one way to sort of get around that would be to turn the national operations of the national parks over to private nonprofits, so that even if there is a government shutdown, the national parks will not be affected, and the government spending for national parks can be taken out of the budget, or at least a large part of that could be taken out of the budget. Gradually, we need to be transferring government functions to the private sector. Another thing that could be done is, for example, welfare, or let's say welfare, or certain aspects of the welfare. We can start with that, where the government money that is being spent on those programs can be given to private nonprofit organizations, and they would not to just one or two, but to many, and they would administer the disbursement of those monies to certain individuals who are currently receiving help from the administration. And these nonprofits would do it more efficiently. In other words, there'd be administrative costs would go down considerably, and also over the years you can identify nonprofits that are more efficient than others, and more money can go to them and less money to those that are less efficient. So so that also here that the government bureaucracy can be reduced. Yes, I'm talking about firing government workers, getting rid of government workers. And they will, I guess, have to join these nonprofits. They will move from the public sector to the private sector. But if they don't do their jobs in the private sector, then they will not have the protections that they do now in the public sector, and they will be encouraged to seek other places of employment. Gradually, we need to be moving in the direction of transferring functions from the government to the private sector. That's the way to deal with the budget deficit. Of course, the Cheongguk Constitution balances the federal budget in peacetime, at least, because in peacetime it will be illegal, it will be unconstitutional for the government to borrow money for the general operations of the government. So that is one of the important changes that will be made to the current USA Constitution by implementing the Cheongguk Constitution. This is the Constitution for a country that does not yet exist, but we believe that in the fullness of time, God will lead us into that country. All right, let's take a break now, and we'll be back with more news in a minute or so.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Welcome back to the King's Report for July 15th, 2017. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. Today, of course, is the eighth day, the eighth and final day of the original substance of divine principle, absolute sex education that is being done at the Sanctuary Church in Newfoundland, Pennsylvania. And we have a lot of people here in the Newfoundland area, and also a lot of people joining us online. And it's really great that people are able to participate in that education. We asked someone asked Reverend Yu yesterday whether the Family Federation is doing OSTP education, and he said his answer was that even in their own terms, and he said that really they cannot because their position now is that the divine principle is wrong because it is a patriarch. It has its view of history. It's very patriarchal, and all the Old Testament and New Testament are patriarchal, and so completely ignore the mother aspect of God, or the mother God, or whatever it is they call it these days. And so they really, because OSTP education is really all about the lineage, and about how God's lineage was lost in the Garden of Eden, how God, of course, created Adam, and then through Adam created Eve. The Bible expresses this as him taking the rib from Adam and creating Eve with that rib. But of course, that is a symbolic representation of the fact that God created Eve with elements of Adam. So anyway, through Adam, he first created Adam, and then through Adam created Eve. And then it was, so it is Adam that carried the seed, the sperm, the seed, and the Shimjong that was imbued with the Shimjong of God. Shimjong being, and this is another thing that has come up, we're going to have to change the English translation of the family pledge, I believe. Anyway, the Shimjong is the, let's see if I can get this right, it's the irrepressible impulse in a subject partner to experience joy by giving love to an object partner. There's an irrepressible impulse. And in the current English translation of the Family Pledge, for example, we translate the Sade Shimjongkwan as the four great realms of heart. But it's not the four great realms of heart, it's the four great realms of Shimjong. And I think probably we're going to have to, I'm going to have to recommend to the king that we change the English translation to say the four great realms of Shimjong, because I think four great realms of heart is not a good translation at all. I think there's just some words that we're going to have to learn, some Korean words that we're going to have to learn. You know, Father said that everyone has to learn Korean because that is the language in which Father expressed God's truth. Father was a translator. Father is a translator, and he acted as a translator. He took God's truth and translated that into a human language. And all languages come from a fallen background, are the product of a fallen history and fallen culture. But among all those languages, God was able to prepare Korean to be the least bad of all languages, or you could say the best, or I would say the least bad of all languages, to be able to express God's truth. And you know, even Father had to make up words. And for example, Chunju is a word that Father used often, and this was a word that he used to express the combination of the spiritual world and the physical world. That the entire creation of God is a Chunju, and Chunju is a word that existed in Korean, but it had a different meaning. But now we translate that into English as cosmos. And people say, well, that's not what it means in cosmos, so we need to find a different word in English. We need to express it a different way because the meaning of cosmos is different. But you see, already in Korean, Father has taken a word that had a different meaning and imbued it with his own meaning. And so we can do that. We can do the same thing in English. How did I get onto this? So anyway, the OSDP education, yes, OSDP education, and how the Family Federation is not doing that because they now believe that the principle is wrong, that it's a patriarchal system that needs to be changed. And I think probably Andrew Wilson is working on that even as we speak. So anyway, this is the place where OSDP education is being given. But this was the education that Father said every blessed family in the world should receive. And as people become blessed, they need to receive this education. Father arrived in Busan in 1951. Yes, early 1951. And he began writing the text of the Wolli Wonbon at that time. And apparently he already had writings in North Korea when he was in North Korea. So Wolli Wonbon was not his first expression of God's truth. When he was, of course, he went to North Korea, I think in 1948, and began ministering there, evangelizing there, and he was preaching there in Pyongyang, and he had writings there which he entrusted to someone, and the account that Reverend Yu has given us is that this someone put them in a jar, or sort of an earthenware jar, and then buried them. And then later, when Father was in prison, Father gave instruction to go to this man and secure those documents. But when the man was approached, he said, "Oh yeah, I buried them, and now I can't remember where I buried them." Okay. Yeah. So, if someone, I can imagine later on, maybe 10, 20 years later, 50 years later, someone's going to be digging in their backyard, or some construction project is going to be, a redevelopment construction project is going to be going on in Pyongyang, and they're going to uncover an earthenware jar with all of Father's early writings. That's going to be something. But anyway, Father came to Busan in early 1951 and began writing the Worldly Wonbon in May of 1951 and finished that in May of 1952. So he spent 1 year writing down the Worldly Wonbon, and then so this was his expression of God's truth, and in some of the early members hand copied. There were no Xerox machines in Korea, or at least not except in a few places. But most people in Korea in the early 1950s did not have access to Xerox machines. So some of the early members copied this Worldly Wonbon, and I know some of them are keeping those copies in safe places. And then that Worldly Wonbon, though, was not really conducive to teach to new members or to members at large, or to help people understand. And so Father's Worldly Wonbon has been kind of rearranged in three stages, and the OSTP is the third of those three stages. The first stage was a book called Worldly Haesol, or the explanation of principles. I guess you'd translate it into English. That's my sort of on-the-spot right now translation. It may or may not be correct. And that was written by, or arranged by Mr. Yu Hyo-won, of course, under Father's direction, explanation of the principles. And so that took the Worldly Wonbon and sort of tried to explain that, or give it make it easier for people to understand, what was going on, to make it more organized or something like that. And then later on came the Worldly Kangnon, which was then took the Worldly Haesol and sort of rearranged that to make it easier to lecture, so that it could be transmitted or conveyed more easily in lecture format. And the Worldly Kangnon was translated into English, and a number of translations have come out, and the most recent being 1996 translation as the Divine Principle. I think the 1996 translation may have been the third or so translation into English. So that was the Worldly Kangnon, and then I think in 2008 we have the Poncheron, and I'm going to have to talk. I'm hoping to talk with Reverend Yu a little more about how we translate the word Poncheron into English. Right now, our translation is original substance of the Divine Principle. But it's a very short word in Korean, right? But then we have what? How many words in English? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words in English. So I think I keep feeling that there must be a better English translation. But anyway, the Korean title is Poncheron, and this is the perfection stage expression of the Wolli Wonbon, and of course here too, as President Yoo Hyo-won, the husband of the woman we know as Mrs. Sa or Mrs. Yoo. And he was the first president of the Unification Church. So the President Yu, of course, when he wrote the Wolli Haesor and the Wolli Kangnon, he worked very much under Father's direction. And Reverend Yu, now Yu Jong-ok, not the same Yu, or not related, in fact, completely different name in Korean. But anyway, the same transliteration, similar transliteration in English. Reverend Yu Jong-ok, who is here with us now, also worked closely with Father in putting together the Poncheron. In fact, Father signed off on it before he went to Spirit World. And so now this is the you could say the new basic theological text of the Unification Church, of Fathers of the Lord of the Second Advent, the new theological text of the Lord of the Second Advent. And of course, after the Wolli Kangnon came out, there was Dr. Sang-Yor Lee, who was a medical doctor and a philosopher, wrote the Unification Thought book and books about unification thought, sort of explaining divine principle in philosophical terms and putting it into context of the Eastern and Western philosophies and the history of those philosophies. And then also another gentleman, I think it was what was his name? I've forgotten his name now. Wrote the Victory over Communism and Counterproposal, which is which we studied a great deal in the 1970s and in 1980s, I guess, also. And those were sort of practical applications, considered practical applications of the Wolli Kangnon, the divine principle. And now Poncheron has come out, and Father has instructed that that everyone be educated in the Poncheron, and that you be educated in at least go through this education at least 5 times. So it is the further development of the divine principle. So this is the new theological text of Christ at the Second Advent, and we'll be studying this, I'm sure, very much. And we've put this on tape here, of course. Already we put the various days. Today's the 8th day, so the first 7 days I think are already on YouTube. But that is you're only getting the English translation, the simultaneous translation, which simultaneous translation is good for the people who are there at that time, but it's not the record that we want to keep as a permanent record of what Mr. Yu has been saying. So we also have the Korean soundtrack, and of course we have his Korean slides, and so we are going to be doing a lot of work now based on what basically this is kind of a data dump that Reverend Yu has given us over the past 8 days, and we have to really go through this and develop this. We need to finish out the English slides, for example. We need to make a transcript of the Korean soundtrack, and we need to then translate that into a proper English translation. And then we'll have material that we can start educating people around the world. So first there was the Wolli Wonbon, and then there was the formation, growth, and perfection stages of the expression of the Wolli Wonbon. And there are aspects, that Father admitted, could not be expressed in the 1950s or 1960s Korea in that particular historical context. This idea, for example, of the sperm and the absolute sex and sperm of God and absolute sex and that kind of thing if it had been expressed in 1950, would have gotten Father really put in jail for a very, very long time. He was having trouble. The Unification Church was called a sex cult even without that. And so it would have been made Father's course much, much more difficult. And so that is an aspect that is being expressed much more clearly now. So this is the, anyway, in Korean is the Poncheron 절대성 교육. Poncheron, however you want to translate that. 절대성, we translate as absolute sex, 교육, education. And he said this is not, he said these are not lectures. I'm not lecturing, I'm educating. Not sure the difference there, but anyway, that distinction is important to him, and so we'll have to understand that distinction more clearly. But this is an education. It's not a workshop; it's an education. Okay, so that's where we are. So anyway, I was going to do something else this segment, but I wound up talking about that. Isn't that interesting? All right. Anyway, we'll take another 5-minute break, and then we'll come back with more news from a Tony perspective.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
On their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be
And welcome back to the King's Report for July 15th, 2017. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. And we're on the 8th year of Cheongi, second fifth month, and the 22nd day, yes, 22nd day. And as I explained earlier, the Cheongi calendar began in 2010, the Jubilee year that Father proclaimed after his victory in the 50-year course from 1960. And so he set a new calendar at that time. And so we are maintaining that calendar. Let's go through some of the headlines in Drudge. Republicans exempt their own insurance from Obamacare rollback. You know, many people have suggested that, hey, you know, this whole thing about healthcare insurance, it's simple. All you have to do is take the insurance that congressmen and senators are getting and expand it to the whole country. Yeah, I mean, they have their own thing going, and they like it, but they don't want anybody else to have it. Cheongguk Constitution forbids the federal government from getting involved in insurance. Sound like a good solution? Sounds like a good solution to me. Shock claim: Russians passed DNC dirt documents during Donald Jr. meet. Okay. This whole Russia thing, I'm sure you're getting a lot of it from other sources. I don't know if we really need to get into it here. Someone here on CNN anchor said, "I'm getting Russia fatigue." I think we're all getting Russia fatigue, right? And we just had an article in the first hour how most of America doesn't care about this. And they see this as a media's attempt to undermine Trump and to overturn the results of the 2016 presidential election. So let's look at what's happening that it does not contain the word Russia. Yeah? Firefighters battling massive 4-alarm high-rise blaze in Hawaii. No sprinklers, firefighters still battling, 3+ dead, 16+ injured. Very sad that is happening in Hawaii, and I hope that people there can be safe. Update: a U.S. appeals travel ban ruling to Supreme Court. We covered that. The administration is appealing to the Supreme Court on a ruling made by a Hawaii judge that expanded and kind of rewrote the administration's definition of a close family tie, so that and the effect of it will be to bring in more refugees than what the administration wants to do. Amazon antitrust concerns emerge in Washington and Wall Street. The King was talking yesterday about how the time may have come to break up Amazon, and he was encouraging people to. He said that he himself had canceled all his Amazon subscriptions, vitamins and so forth. Apparently, he was subscribing to those, and he said that he has transferred those to other places. And in one case, he said that he went to eBay to buy something that he would have otherwise bought on Amazon, and found that he got the same product for half the price. And he was encouraging people to stop using Amazon. And I intend to implement that in our family. I was using Amazon quite a bit more, after I came here, because you're in a rural area, and Amazon is kind of convenient. There are about 3 Walmarts in this area, but each of them is a half hour apart. We're just about exactly a half hour from three Walmarts, and other sort of because. There are not that many that's the difference. One of the differences between living in an urban area and in a rural area. In an urban area, you may have fast food, 2 or 3 fast food places just within walking distance, or 7-Eleven or something like that within walking distance, or something like that. And here you don't. You have to get in a car to go buy anything. You run out of milk, you got to get in a car to go buy your milk. That kind of stuff. So, of course, I don't buy milk on Amazon, but whenever we find that we need something, it's become kind of a habit just to go on Amazon and order it and have it delivered by where. And actually, after I came to Northeast Pennsylvania. That was the first time that I actually started paying for an Amazon Prime membership. And so we just have it delivered within a couple of days, and it's great. You don't have to go all the way to a store to buy stuff. And so as a result, of course, a lot of industries have been disrupted in a major way, and a lot of course, brick and mortar stores are closing. Sears is closing a lot, and Kmart's closed. One store down in Mount Pocono was closed 2 years ago, in 2015, and then now they're either have already or in the process of closing the store in Viewmont Mall in north of Scranton. So Kmart is closing stores around here. Sears is closing stores. Other brick and mortar places are closing stores, and so this is because more and more shopping is being done online. But it's important to support local businesses and support local economies. When the King and Kukchinim moved to this area in Northeast Pennsylvania, specifically to Pike County, in 2013, what they found was a place where the leaders of this of Pike and Wayne and other Northeast Pennsylvania counties were really struggling with how to develop the industries in this area that would allow young people to stay in this area. That connects to strengthening the family, because if children cannot find jobs in the area where the family has settled, then that's going to strain the family relationships. It's going to make them long term, and kids, if kids move across the country or even to another country in order to find jobs, then that's going to put a huge strain on the family relationships. It's going to make it difficult for the parents to be involved. Eventually when they become grandparents, to be involved in the lives of their grandchildren, and that's important for small children to have experience with their grandparents. So supporting local businesses helps do that. And getting back to what the King and Kukchinim found here, they found that the Pike County had made an effort to create a light manufacturing industrial park in Pike County, and in fact they had given it the name Pike County Industrial Park. But this project had gone bankrupt. The county had purchased the land and had begun to put in some infrastructure, had begun to put in a couple of roads, I guess, maybe one or two roads, but then couldn't afford to continue it, and it just went bankrupt and and the land had been lying there, so sitting there off the books, off the tax rolls for some time, for some years, and Kukchinim came along and decided to purchase that industrial park, the whole park, and the land here, of course, is cheap, and so his company was able to afford to purchase that with the cash that they had on hand. I'm not familiar with all the details of the purchase, but I do know that his company was able to afford that purchase. And now he has, of course, built the car arms factory on that land, and also a gun retail store called Tommy Gun Warehouse, and is gradually building up that land. Of course, I think it's on the market. Sections of the land are on the market for anyone who wants to invest in that land with a business that's going to have synergy. So gradually, and these things take time, and so gradually, the King and Kukchinim are helping to develop the economy of this area, the local economy of this area. And as much as possible, we try to spend our money in this area. And certainly getting out of Amazon is part of that effort. Aside from the fact that Jeff Bezos, who is the owner of Amazon, head of Amazon, is does not share our ideals. He is very much of a globalist. As you saw, he was in Sun Valley. You saw that, the photograph. And he is supporting very much a globalist viewpoint and globalist agenda. And so the king yesterday spoke about how we should spend our money in ways that are consistent with our vision and our ideals. We should give our money to people who share those that vision and ideals. And Jeff Bezos is definitely not one of those people. And so I'm going to be canceling my Amazon Prime membership and figuring out ways to buy my stuff locally, or maybe that half-hour trip to Walmart maybe is worth it to help support and help create jobs in this area and help sustain jobs in this area, so that the kids who graduate from high school here don't have to go to other parts of the country in order to find jobs. That really breaks up the families, and that's a terrible thing that happens here. We have a more and more second generation in our congregation here in Newfoundland, and we have more and more second generation blessings also, and I'm sure they'll be giving birth to third generations very, very soon. Some of them already have, of course. And we need to build up a economy here where those families can stay here, where they can stay here and have ways to support their families, so that they don't have to move away from this congregation in order to support their families. That's really a challenge in this kind of a rural area. Of course, the advantage is that we can do it, and we can do it to tailor that economy to our people and to our needs. That would be the advantage, and so that people with skills will be able to use those skills here in this area. So anyway, Amazon antitrust concerns emerge in Washington and Wall Street, and it's about time. Each box mailed gets $1.46 government subsidy. I read this article yesterday. This is the second day, I think, that it's been on Drudge. And this is a problem. And one person this was an opinion piece, and I think it's the Wall Street Journal, right? It's an opinion piece. I think it links to Wall Street Journal, about how the government's, the U.S. Post Office has a monopoly on the delivery of first-class mail. In other words, non-urgent mail. They have a monopoly on that, and they can't support themselves with that, so they also deliver boxes or packages. And but the first-class mail is basically subsidizing the delivery of boxes and packages, and the ratio hasn't changed, but the pricing has not changed in the meantime. And so now people who mail boxes through U.S. Post Office are getting a large subsidy from the government, basically. Bezos on brink of the world's richest. We can all help take or keep Bezos from making more money. Lawmaker calls for hearing on purchase of Whole Foods. Of course, they're referring to the Amazon's purchase of the Whole Foods supermarket chain for $13.7 billion. I believe that was last month. New Turkey purge on eve of failed coup anniversary. Labels accuse YouTube of biggest threat to industry. A man with no pulse for 45 minutes cheats death. That's interesting. I'd like to interview him, see if he had any kind of a near-death experience or out-of-body experience. O.J. parole hearing to be televised. Some people just never go away, do they? Gonorrhea epidemic hits Oregon. Okay. Of course, absolute sex. If you have just one sex, how would that be? If we just had if people just said, okay, let's have just one sexual partner in a lifetime. You can have as much sex as you want, but with the same partner. What a novel idea, huh? That of course is absolute sex. Just having one sexual partner in your lifetime. Absolute sex is a lot more than that, but that's a good starting point. Update: Russian lobbyist says he also met Trump Jr. Okay, that's another headline with Russia in it that we don't want to. Let's just skip all this Russia stuff. Tax cuts never. Yeah, it's at least not this year, it looks like. Trump is fighting a war here. He's fighting against the self-proclaimed aristocracy that people call the deep state. And so things are not going smoothly. But we need to place blame where blame belongs. And he's up against a very entrenched system. And when the midterm elections come around next year, we're going to have to really support him hard and help put people in Congress who share his ideals and views so that he can get his stuff through Congress. Here in Pennsylvania, we have a Democratic senator who is coming up for re-election next year, and he has recently been coming out very strongly in favor of gun control, in favor of Obamacare. Previously, he was not so much in favor of gun control because, here in Pennsylvania, guns are pretty popular. But now he's very much cast his lot with the gun control lobby. And so we need to replace him. We need to replace him, absolutely replace him next year, so that President can have a strong victory in next year's midterm elections. And right now, it's 52 to 48 in the Senate, including some of the independents who vote with the Democrats. And that ratio needs to be changed. And the people who will vote for the president's agenda the number of those people need to be increased in both the Senate and the House. Budget deficit spikes to $702 billion. We covered that. Heirs to the chief. Pence brings in reinforcement. Speculation mounts. Of course, here we go. You see, people are encouraging, the media is encouraging this idea that Trump is going to somehow be removed from office one way or another, either by assassination, impeachment, or removal by the 25th Amendment that will declare him as being incompetent. They're trying all three of those. They're really pushing very hard on all three fronts. And they're spreading this idea that Vice President Pence is going to come into the presidency. Veep one-on-one with Trudeau. McAuliffe takes shot. Ambulance company claims rivals slashed brake lines, shot out windows. Wow. There's a ambulance. I didn't realize ambulance driving was such a dangerous thing to do. Sounds like the mafia is involved or something. Dog gives birth to green puppy. We did that already. If you missed that, please go back. I'm sure you want to hear that. 9-year-old girl silenced at city council meeting. Alarming spike in middle school suicide. Yeah, we did that, didn't we? That's a very suicide among 10 to 14-year-olds have increased from 0.9 to 2.1 per 100,000 population between 2007 and 2014. And we discussed some of the things related to that from a Choni Group perspective. Zuck late for billionaire clubs meeting. Sun Valley secret tech demos. Quiet Italy hamlets struggle with migrant human warehouses. Italy really is really suffering from a tidal wave of migration from North Africa. And apparently what happens is that there are certain times of the year when the Mediterranean is relatively calm. And so people in North Africa use that opportunity to cross over into Italy, especially. And it's kind of become a business apparently. So the people and these migrants, of course, are taken advantage of by just about everyone they meet on the way. And the people who promise to take them across the Mediterranean will collect the money from them and take them maybe a couple miles out to sea. And then they will send out an SOS or something like that or something like that. And then either a Coast Guard from Italy or some country will come and save them. They're not really in distress, all right? They just went out a couple of miles and then they don't want to use up all their gas. I mean, and besides, they want to go back to North Africa, Libya, or wherever, and pick up more people and come back out. So they just go out maybe 2 or 3 miles out to sea and then send out an SOS. and they'll be picked up either by a Coast Guard ship of a Southern European country or by a nonprofit organization that is sort of rescuing people. And they'll be taken to the nearest port, which is an Italian port. And so Italy is getting huge numbers of migrants now, and it's a real crisis for them because they can't assimilate all those migrants. And here, this article, there used to be a sleepy hamlet. There used to be sleepy hamlets on Italy's sun-baked Padan plain, but 2 years with hundreds of asylum seekers packed into overcrowded centers dubbed human warehouses are taking their toll on both migrants and villagers. Let me increase the font on this so I can read it a little more easily. There we go. Inside vast white tents erected in a former military zone on the outskirts of the tiny village of Coneta, some 1,400 men from across Africa, while away their days, packed into endless rows of bunks as the temperatures rise. So these are 1,400 men, and mostly of military age, men. So this is not a migration. This is an invasion. Let's see it for what it is. Many escape for a few hours to cycle around the area, but they are met with hostile banners calling for them to leave. I used to call this place a modern lager, Cana Mayor Alberto Penafilo told AFP, referring to concentration camps. The commune of Kona includes the little village of Coneta. After 2 years, this is still a place where human beings are squashed in together with no hope for the future. Now I call it a human warehouse. The migrants arrive; they don't know where to put them. They have a warehouse. They dump them here. The asylum seekers were treated like garbage, he added. Pamphilio says the 190 residents in Coneta have also suffered. Among several protest messages scrawled on sheets and hung up in the village square, one simply reads, "Repatriate the migrants." About around 10 kilometers away, and that's about 6.2 miles in Bagnoli de Sopra, some 700 migrants are crowded into another former military base. There are more barbed wire fences among the endless fields of soybean and corn, and no access to journalists. Mayor Roberto Milan said the residents there had held sit-ins demanding the migrants be removed, but to no effect. The tension is great. There's a lot of hostility. There are many of them, and it's not possible to create ties with the local population. That leads to mutual distrust, he told AFP by phone. They come, they go, they ask for money, he said. Musa Bamba, a 31-year-old from the Ivory Coast, said he would pay a price for speaking out about conditions inside the Coneta camp, but pleaded for authorities to allow them to use their time profitably. I ask for one thing, training. Teach us some skills while we wait here, to be a bricklayer, electrician, mechanic, to allow us to integrate if we stay or return having learned something, he said. Over 85,000 people have been brought to safety in Italy so far this year. 85,000 people so far this year, after being rescued in the Mediterranean as they attempt to the perilous crossing to Europe. Many are fleeing horrors and crisis-hit Libya. What has been described as the worst migrant crisis since World War II began in earnest in 2014 when 170,000 people landed in Italy. Europe forced Italy to close its borders in 2015 to prevent people traveling onwards. Since then, the number of people blocked in the country has risen sharply, along with requests for asylum, which jumped from 63,500 in 2014 to 123,000 in 2016. Those filing the requests can wait up to 2 years for a result. In the meantime, humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross warn that the conditions in the reception centers are deteriorating. It's really sad to see Europe collapse in this way. And this is one of the reasons that we are very grateful that we dodged the bullet that was named Hillary Clinton. And we got President Trump, and of course he's not a perfect man by any means, but at least he is standing up for American sovereignty, and that's very, very important right now. Look at what is happening in Italy. We don't want this to happen in America. This is not good would not be good for America, would not be good for the world. And this, what's happening in Europe is not good for the world. It's not good for Europe. But this kind of a sovereignty, undermining of sovereignty is going on by the international elite class that is the self-appointed aristocracy. See, they are immune from this kind of thing. They can go to their retreats in Sun Valley or in Davos, and they can have this thing. But meanwhile, the common people in Europe are suffering a great deal. This is the update on the slow motion train wreck that is happening in Europe. And we really need to. One of the things about the Choniguk is that people are allowed to make mistakes and take responsibility for those mistakes themselves, but also other people learn from them. And certainly America needs to learn from the disastrous mistake that is being committed in Europe. Washington Post leads Saturday, Trump weighing new policy to expedite deportations. Illegals face criminal charges for first offenses. North Korea likely has more plutonium than previously thought. Again, a war could break out on the Korean Peninsula any day. Any day we could wake up to find that we have war on the Korean Peninsula and that hundreds of thousands of people are dying in the Seoul area as a result of artillery from North Korea. Castro lashes out at USA. Beloved pastor's suicide shocks churchgoers. I want to go to this story here. A man found dead in the waters near Pelham Bay has been identified as a pastor who police believe took his own life. Pastor Amiris Amela, 61, was found in the water around 9:30 a.m. Thursday. A dumbbell had been tied around the holy man's neck. The pastor's son-in-law found his body by the docks at the Evers Marina off of Outlook Avenue, police sources said. The marina is down the block from Amela's home and the offices of Letting Christ Be Known, an evangelical church where he is pastor. The actual house of worship is a storefront on Starling Avenue in Parkchester, congregants said. An autopsy hasn't been concluded, but investigators are leaning towards suicide. Responding officers found a suicide note in Amela's car, and family members said he had been suffering from depression. His death left congregants stunned. "It's hard for me to swallow that he committed suicide," said one church member who wished not to be named. He loved his church dearly. Miller and his son-in-law, who is co-pastor, were building a new church on Bartow Avenue in Baychester, congregants said. And I come to this story because, I don't know if this man actually committed suicide. The police initially are leaning towards suicide, they say. And so I don't know if this man committed suicide or not. Maybe someone staged a murder to look like suicide. That happens. Suicide notes are not necessarily written by the people who commit the suicide. But sometimes a murder is staged to look like suicide, and especially if he's engaged in a large construction project, then he could have gotten in with the wrong crowd, as they say, had to borrow money from the wrong people, that kind of thing. I don't know. So let's leave this alone. But I wanted to cover this article because pastors sometimes do commit suicide or either physically or spiritually. And one of the things that Revenue was talking about in this OSTP education, OSTP Absolute Sex Education, was that Satan invades the people who are closest to the central figure. For example, in the case of Jesus, Satan invaded Peter and Judas, the two disciples who were very, very close to Jesus. Peter, of course, being kind of the head disciple, and Judas being the sort of the treasurer, or the guy who was keeping the money and maintaining the books. And of course, Peter, before Jesus was going to be crucified, shortly before that, he asked Peter, who do you think I am? And Peter testified that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God. But Jesus also told him that that evening, Peter would deny Jesus 3 times. That night, would deny Jesus 3 times before the cock crowed. And the Roman soldiers came and arrested Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and took him to the court to be tried. And Jesus was asked, "Are you the Son of God?" And he said, "Yes." And Reverend Yu points out, and I'm sure this comes from the conversations that he had with Father, that Jesus' testimony needed to be supported by a third person there, a third party there. Peter was there. All the other disciples had already scattered. They'd already run away. But at least Peter was there. And he could have stood up right there and said, "Yeah, I've been this man with the past 2 years and 8 months, and he is who he says he is. He's a fantastic person, and these are the things he's done, and these are the things he's said. And based on all this, I believe he is the Son of God, the Son of the living God. That's my belief." And maybe if he had done that, Peter would have been crucified along with Jesus. But even at the cost of his own life, Peter needed to do that, to testify to Jesus in that moment. And, the history of Providence would have been different if he had done that. But instead, he denied Jesus. And Jesus knew this was going to happen, because Jesus could already see, prior to that, that Satan had already invaded Peter, even at the time that Peter was testifying to him, saying to Jesus, privately, that you are the Son of the living God, Satan had already entered Peter, and Jesus could see this. And so that's why he told Peter, "You're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows." But Peter sort of forgot about this. And it wasn't until the third denial that he sort of caught himself and said, "Oh wow, what just happened?" He said that I was going to deny him 3 times before the cock crowed, and now and at the moment that the cock crowed, he remembered that. So when Jesus told Peter this, Jesus told him that for a reason, so that Peter could straighten up and align himself with Jesus more closely. And same with Judas. Judas, there are various theories on why he did what he did, but why he sold Jesus for the 30 pieces of silver. The same thing with that Judas also needed to align himself more closely with Jesus, so as to prevent himself from betraying Jesus in the way that he did. People wonder how Reverend Kwok could have become what he is. How Reverend Kwok could unite with Satan and become Satan to betray our true Father the way that he did. That's what Satan does. He attacks the person who is closest. There's one explanation that the Messiah comes to love the unlovable and forgive the unforgivable, and so he gathers the worst people from around the world in order and put them near him so that he can love them. Another explanation is that we are all frail human beings, fallen human beings, and so that's true with people who are. As true with people who are close to the Messiah as those who are far away from him. So when a person, by the grace of God or by circumstance, finds himself being placed next to the central figure, next to the Messiah, next to the Christ, then Satan chooses that person to attack, because that is the way that he can attack the Messiah himself. He can't attack the Messiah because Satan tried to attack Jesus in the wilderness. He gave him 3 temptations, and Jesus had defeated him in each of those temptations. And so, but Satan still needs to attack the Messiah somehow. And so if he can't attack him directly, then he attacks him indirectly through the people who are closest to him. And that's what happened with Reverend Kwok. At least that's one explanation of that we can give for what happened with Reverend Kwok. That because he was close to Father, he was chosen to be Satan's target. Perhaps he was farther away. If he was one of those people in the back of the room, he would not have, Satan would not have bothered with him. But because he happened to be close to Father, Satan attacked him. So that brings me to me. Yeah, that brings me to my situation. Because I was one of those guys in the back of the room, and, sort of, oh, do I have to go to this event today? Oh, and now I'm here. Wow. So you can imagine that, Satan will try to attack True Father's representative body and heir directly. He will try that. But that's a pretty tough target because, Hyung-Jinim is a pretty difficult target for Hyung-Jinim. So guess what? I'm next. Or, not just me, but the other people who are close to Hyung-Jinim are next. And I'm one of them. And that's one of the things that I've realized through this OSTP education. And so what do I do? What do I do to keep from becoming Satan? What do I do to keep from becoming Judas? What do I do to keep from becoming Peter? And that's actually something that I've been thinking about the past few days. How do I, because Satan is much, much, much stronger than me. And if it were just me, just a one-on-one situation, I wouldn't stand a chance. So what do I do? Well, that's what this education is for. Because through this we learn that through this education we learn that God is a God of principle, law, and order, and that God is able to work with us when we align ourselves with His principle, and with His law, and with His order. And Reverend Yu gives the example, of when a couple, a man and a husband and wife are walking down the street. God wants to walk with them. God wants to walk with them. But in order to do that, the husband and wife need to walk in a way that is consistent with God's principle, law, and order. By that I mean that the husband on the right side to the right of the wife, and the wife to the left of the husband. And this kind of thing may seem silly, that this is just what difference does it make of which side we walk on? But when we walk in a way that is consistent with God's principle, laws, and order, then we establish a condition where God can walk with us. And that's one example, but we need to set conditions so that God can be with us. And we are always, we are always thinking thoughts, and some thoughts are good thoughts, and some thoughts are evil thoughts. And whenever we think a good thought, then we're setting a condition for God to be with us, for us to relate with God. And whenever we have an evil thought, of course, we are setting the condition for Satan to have a deeper relationship with us. And Jesus said that if you even think about having a sexual relationship with a woman who is not your wife, then you have already committed adultery. So thoughts matter. Thoughts matter. And especially in this day, in the last days. Thoughts really matter. So, and Satan is always trying to invade those thoughts, trying to create. So whenever we have an evil thought, he will use that as a condition to try to strengthen his tie to us. And so, Father gave us various ways in which we can strengthen our ties to God. And I hope that people will go through the 8 days of education that we're having. These are 5 lectures a day. 8 times 5 is 40, and each lecture is 90 minutes or hour and a half. So that's 60 hours of lectures that we're having during these 8 days. So that's a lot of material. And it's on their own YouTube now, even with the very incomplete simultaneous translation. But even with that incomplete translation, I hope that you will go through those 60 hours of lectures, because a lot of important information is in there, and we will be augmenting that with the more accurate and fuller translations later on. But I hope even that with these incomplete translations that you will go through them, because this pastor. Assuming for the moment that this article is correct and the police are correct, and assuming for the moment that he committed suicide, I would say that this is an example where Satan was able to attack a person who was in a leadership role and who was in an important position for God. And I don't know the circumstances, but this happens to pastors. This happens to pastors where Satan is always trying to invade, especially pastors, because they are leading people to God, and Satan doesn't want that. And so pastors also need to hear this OSDP's Absolute Sex Education so that they can learn how to fight Satan more effectively. Learn how to fight Satan more effectively. I said earlier when we were talking about the article on the early teen suicide, that jujitsu is an important skill for early teens to learn so as to be able to stand up to bullies in school. But really, OSDP Absolute Education is along with that. I think this is an important set of knowledge. It's important knowledge that we need in order to be more confident, in order to be stronger in our battle, our daily battle against Satan. We are battling Satan every moment of every day. We are battling Satan every moment of every day. And that is especially, the closer you are to the center of God's providence, the more desperate that battle becomes. If you're, one of the people sitting in the back of the room, even then, you have a family, right? So Satan's trying to take your family. So even then, there's still a battle going on there. If you're a parent, or if you're a child, member of a family, Satan is trying to attack. Satan is trying to attack. And in the family, if the father is strong and Satan cannot attack the father, he will attack the mother. If the mother is also strong, he will attack the firstborn. So every member of the family needs to learn how to defeat, or at least to repel Satan's attacks, because they are constant. They are constant. They are constant. They are constant. And I feel this more strongly now because I'm much closer to the center of the providence than I used to be. And it was always true, but I feel it much more urgently now. And especially those of us who are near the center owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to everybody, because we are not just representing ourselves. Being near the center means that we are representing all humanity, and we are here we are attending the representative body and an heir of the Messiah on behalf of all of humanity, past, present, and future. And we need to do well. We need to do well. Because if we mess things up like Peter and Judas did, it's what Peter and Judas did has affected human history for thousands of years, and has affected the lives of billions of people. their actions, if Peter had taken the right actions in court there and stood up for Jesus, that would have affected the lives of billions of people over the past 2,000 years. So it's very serious. It's very serious. We're not acting only on our own behalf or even our own family or our own tribe, but we're really acting on the behalf of all humanity, past, present, and future. That's a huge responsibility, and we need to take that responsibility very, very seriously. Very sorry for this pastor and his family. My condolences to them. But let's use the story about his death as a reminder to ourselves that the more we serve God, the more Satan will attack us, and the more we need to arm ourselves with the proper knowledge and weapons to be able to defeat Satan in our lives. And we do that not only for ourselves, we do it for our families, for our tribe, but if we are near the center of the providence, then we are doing it for all humanity, past, present, and future. Whew, yeah, that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy. That is pretty heavy. But that's where we are today. That's where we are today. This is very, very, very serious times. Diamond calls out Washington stupid, SHIT, talking like a politician again. CNN anchor, I have Russia fatigue, as many of us do. Narrative made up 93% of show's airtime. Yeah, CNN is still stuck on Russia. Genetically engineered mosquitoes could wipe out Zika. Okay, double-edged sword. The king is talking about it, how, maybe it can wipe out Zika, maybe it'll wipe out the human race as well while it's at it. We don't know what these scientific inventions are doing. Genetic engineering is a very dangerous thing. And I think we should look for other natural remedies that God has already given us, rather than trying to mess with God's creation. Museum selfie gone wrong, causes $200,000 in damage. 89-year-old says shark attack at nude beach not deterring daily swim. Good to have. Well, yeah, okay. Well, if you got to go, being attacked by a shark while you're swimming is probably one of the better ways to go. I mean, it sure beats lying in a hospital bed or a retirement home for years and just waiting for death to overcome you. I can understand that. A mother arrested for towing kids behind car. Okay. Mother arrested for towing kids behind car. With that, we've come to the end of our broadcast for July 15th of 2017, the 8th year of Chungi, and the second fifth month, the 22nd day by the heavenly calendar. And let's learn more and more about the heavenly calendar because that's part of a Father's tradition that He gave us, and we need to understand. Why is there a second fifth month, and why is it the second fifth month and not the fourth month or the sixth month? All that kind of stuff we need to learn, and we need to be able to carry on that tradition for the next hundreds of thousands of years. All right, thank you very much for joining us, and please have a blessed day. God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.